Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by ARX, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I have ever seen. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly, and I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give you the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all of the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. To find out more about ARX and get $500 off install when you place an order, please go to arxfit.com and mention Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, to get $500 off install when you order, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. Hi friend, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that shows you how to optimize your health and get the most out of your high intensity training and start and grow your HIIT business. My former guests include the who's who in high-intensity training, people like Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Jim Flanagan, health, fitness, and nutrition giants like Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf, successful high-intensity training entrepreneurs and exercise scientists like Luke Carlson, Dr. James Fisher, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, and many, many more. This episode is also brought to you by the HIIT Business Membership. This is an online blueprint that I have designed to help you grow your HIIT business, including exclusive content on sales, marketing, hiring, pricing, retention, and personal training, monthly Q&As of experts, and high-grade community full of thought leaders and high-intensity training entrepreneurs. If you're interested, please go to corporatewarrior.co/membership. My guest today is Dr. Ben Bocchicchio. You can contact Dr. Ben over at his website, drbenbo.com, drbenbo.com, and check out Dr. Ben's book, which is called 15 Minutes to Fitness, Dr. Ben's Smart Plan for Diet and Total Health, which is a very interesting read on high-intensity training and comes with a high-fat, low-carb diet guide and meal plans. And Dr. Ben was kind enough to send that over to me. I very much enjoyed reading that book, and it gave me a lot of questions to ask him during this podcast. Dr. Ben has a very impressive resume, and in order to make this intro somewhat succinct, I've just captured the highlights, which I'll tell you about now. Dr. Vincent Ben Bocchicchio has been an innovator and leader in the fields of fitness, exercise, and health since the 1970s. Dr. Ben was an award-winning athlete in high school and college and was involved personally in professional and international athletics. He was awarded degrees in the fields of health and exercise at the undergraduate, master's, doctoral, and postdoctoral levels. In 1973, Dr. Ben founded Sports Conditioning in Staten Island. The initial objective was to condition professional and world-class athletes. Using the same principles that have been so successful with the athletic population, Ben became involved in developing programs for weight reduction, cosmetic enhancement, general fitness, and health and rehabilitation. He was called upon as an expert by professional and college teams, TV, radio, screen, and stage personalities, medical institutions, and corporate entities. Dr. Ben owned and supervised a number of private fitness and health centers from the early 1970s. He also developed and owned spine and cardiovascular rehabilitation centers where he used his SmartX program. In the early 1980s, Dr. Ben founded Cardio Management Systems and used resistance training as an intricate part of phase 2 cardiac rehabilitation. This was the first documented and formal use of such exercise and is now a commonplace protocol. In the mid-1980s, Dr. Ben became the exercise physiologist for Lerman Back Centers in Miami Beach, Florida. Dr. Ben has continued his works in the fields of fitness, wellness, and health to this day. He currently maintains a private fitness and health practice in Arizona. This successful business includes medically managed weight loss programs that combine prescription medication therapy, nutritional counseling, and supervised exercise. Dr. Ben recently conducted studies in the fields of exercise and health. He published and presented his findings to international meetings at the American College of Sports Medicine and the American Physiological Society. Now in his 60s, Dr. Ben continues to train regularly using his revolutionary SmartX training system. This enables him to maintain a high level of strength, significant muscle mass, and a low body fat. He continues to be a much sought-after expert and consultant by corporate, educational, and individual clients. Many of you have asked me to get Dr. Ben on the show, and it is a great opportunity for me to finally get the chance to talk to Ben. We actually did a number of episodes. We did this episode, but we also did an episode for the HIT, or 2 episodes, I should say, for the HIT business membership. One was on how he grew his high-intensity training business, and the other was on SuperSlow training and his view on that and the specifics in terms of how to practice and instruct SuperSlow training. I should say. And if you want the details for that and you'd like access to that, please go to corporatewarrior.co/membership to find out how you can join the private membership and get access to some of those resources. In this podcast, we talk about the origins of SuperSlow training, classic stories and moments with Arthur Jones, Dr. Ben's Nautilus-based business success, and then we segue into high-intensity training, get into the weeds in terms of playing with variables to optimize muscle hypertrophy. Topics discussed include routine length or overall session volume, body weight versus machines, the potential limitations of time-static contractions, alternative techniques for training the seated row and strengthening the abdominals, and why Ben advocates a minimum of 30 seconds time under load, and much, much more. We finished up with some discussion around the requirements for carbs around a workout, and I get Ben's view on fasting before and after training, which is very interesting indeed. To get all the show notes for this, please go to corporatewarrior.co/Dr. Ben, all lowercase. And now, without any further ado, I give you Dr. Ben Bocchicchio. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks very much, Lawrence. Appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Actually, I should say welcome to the show because the first piece you did was for the membership. So this wouldn't be welcoming you back to the main podcast. So this will be your first appearance on the main podcast. It's a pleasure to have you. So there's so much I'm really interested in talking to you about. As you know, I've been doing a fair amount of research and learning more about you and your background, which has been a lot of fun. You had a lot of involvement way back in the day when Arthur Jones was around, growing the Nautilus brand and helping people start businesses and Nautilus fitness centers. I would love to, Arthur Jones was such an interesting character. I'd love to hear about some of your memories of Arthur and your relationship together. If we could start there, that'd be great.
Okay, well, I first got introduced to Arthur in 72. I was in graduate school in Florida, and he had his place up a couple hours north of where I was. And my trainer in college, I played football, track, was doing work with Arthur. He was a physical therapist and a lifter, actually. And he said, "You got to come meet this guy. You guys would hit it off. You're both, pretty intense dudes about this stuff." Anyway, so I went up to meet him. I saw him. Actually, I think I saw Arthur first, 1971, at the Mr. America contest, I believe, in York, Pennsylvania. Pretty sure that was it. And just, gabbed, and he had this giant machine and stuff. And so I got interested in what he was doing. I liked his ideas, and I kept in touch a little bit. And then when he got the machines developed, I went up as a grad student. I was completing my master's and met him and talked to him and saw the stuff and, gave input, and that's how I first met him. And so we're talking about the initial, before there was even a circuit of Nautilus machines. There were these prototypes in a big kind of garage, Quonset hut place. And it was just getting started. So that's when I first met Arthur, and I was kind of intrigued by the concepts And he would put me on the machines, and try to beat me to death because I was a strong kind of at that time I was a 225 pound strong athlete, but anyway, I really loved it. It was great stuff. It was what I was looking for.
How impressed were you when you first used the Nautilus machines for the first time?
Well, the first time I used them, I had prepared for about 3 months, working my ass off with high intensity interval, nonstop to absolute failure exercise with, barbells, dumbbells, and whatever machines were available. And so I was ready. I was ready. And they put me to, and it was Bill Andrews, a fellow who was a Mr. America named Dr. John Gorgo. He was an ophthalmologist. And they wanted to just kill me. When I said, good, kill me, because that's what I'm here for, to be killed. So I went through this workout to absolute, with silly failure, like failure beyond failure. And I was totally impressed. I said, this is awesome. This could kill a dinosaur. This was great stuff. So.
So how did your relationship with Arthur develop from there?
Well, I was interested in the machines. I was interested in how he developed the machines. I had started my background. I think by the time we got to be really talking to each other, I had started on a PhD program and interested in muscle growth, muscle physiology. So a little bit of background about exercise physiology as a science, as a discipline. It started out really in the 70s, and most of the guys that were exercise physiologists were marathon runners, okay? And I was this strength guy. So it was always marathon runners and me. And so I was not particularly interested, other than just intellectually, about what they were talking about with VO2 max, and, marathon running is the way to save your life and your heart. And so that's where exercise physiology got started. It was a lot of study about the stuff that they were interested in. And I was not that specifically and primarily interested in that. I was interested in the strength, part of the deal. And so when I went to do my doctorate, I went to a couple of places in New York, some high-end, I won't mention them, but the really high-end universities, talked to the heads of department, and they had no idea what I was talking about. I was asking questions they had any answers to, so I said, you know what, I'm going to go out and do this on my own. And I met with Arthur, and I said, I want to do a place by myself, and he worked with me on pricing and stuff like that, and they helped price it for me, which they didn't normally do. Anyway, they took care of me, but I talked to him a lot, and he called me about some stuff, and we had some interesting conversations. And Bill Andrews, which most people don't know about, but he's the guy who invented the seated leg curl. He turned around the Nautilus leg extension machine. I think he got excommunicated for doing that because Arthur wasn't, didn't take kindly to people changing his design. But he actually, I think, invented the seated leg curl. He just turned the Nautilus machine cam around. And anyway, so he was a cool guy, very interested in lifting, and also he was a smart dude. So I got into it and started opening my places. Now, to give you history, if you want history of slow training, I can give you that now. Okay, so I'll tell you this. As far as me creating slow training, there is no question in the world that I did it, because I didn't know about it. Arthur didn't know about it. Certainly, Ellington didn't know about it. Ken Hutchins asked me all about it, and so did Ellington and Jimmy Flanagan. So he said, what are you doing? Well, when I asked Arthur, I said, the fascinating part about the innovative part of Nautilus machine was the cam that provided variable resistance, supposedly attuned to the specific resistance. The resistance curve was attuned to the strength curve of the human body, okay, which is a big swallow. But okay, that was the idea, variable resistance. So I said, Arthur, how did you figure that out? And he said he went to a geriatric home and he isometrically plotted the strength curve of these older people. So they would have no pre-designed sports training or barbell training. So this was purely an anatomical assessment, right? So he said he plotted these curves, then he made cams to fit those curves. Now, that to me gave, the light went on. I was going to buy these machines. I didn't have that much money. I had to borrow money to buy my first Nautilus machines. And I said, well, if he plotted this isometrically, that's zero speed. So the best use of these cams would be as close to zero speed as I could get. So I figured slow would be best to take advantage of Nautilus machines. Okay, the cams. That's how slow training started. Now, the story about the geriatric home may not be a true one, and only God and Arthur know, and both are right now out of touch. So that's how slow training started. So anybody who says Bob Hoffman did it, that's a bunch of crap. as far as an exercise system, that's where it started. In Staten Island in 1974, I brought it to the public.
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up Bob Hoffman, because I remember him being quoted as coming up with or writing about lifting and lowering weights in 10 seconds or 10-10 or whatever. Do you disagree with that then?
Bob Hoffman couldn't count to 10. Seriously, the guy was he was a decent businessman because he got into the business of weights and he kind of, got organized and sold supplements and stuff like that. But as far as him creating something, he couldn't create the wheel after the fact. I mean, believe me. But Bob Hoffman wrote about everything. He wrote an article called "In Defense of the Potato." I mean, every week he wrote a different article about something. So if he mentioned slow, I guarantee he mentioned fast the next week, or slow. No. So there was no organized system. There was no rationale. There was no science. That was the first slow training. Kenny Hutchins, picked my brain and asked me questions, sincerely and respectfully, and then he designed the term SuperSlow.
Right, okay, so you'll say you kind of conceptualized it and put a proper protocol in place.
To quote Rocky Balboa, when I asked him how come he was working out on a side of beef in the cold house, they said, "Rocky, where'd you learn that?" And he says, "I don't know. I think I invented it." That's my same answer.
Good impression. So, Arthur Jones, eccentric character, and I can actually see why you two got along quite well. Is there any? Do you have any? Do you have any fond memories? Like, because Arthur's always got. Everyone's got a classic story or something Arthur said to them. Do you have anything like that comes to mind? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, people don't realize, but I was the exercise physiologist in the group that did the study on the MedX machines. That I owned part of the company that did that. Excuse me. And so we had a MedX meeting in Florida somewhere, big, doctors, presentations and stuff. And a bunch of people asked me, they said, "Well, you can talk to Arthur because, if we talk to him, he just tells us to go to hell, So they said, "Ask him how he developed those cans." I said, "I already did that." And so I said, "Arthur, a lot of people want me to ask how you developed the cans, for the MedX and for the Nautilus machines." So here was his quote at this international meeting. He said, "Well, if they're so fucking smart, tell them to tell me how I did it." that was he was funny, but it was like, I know. He said, "The hell with them." He was like, and when he wanted to demo machines, he goes, this guy is actually strong and knows what he's talking about. So let him demo the machines. He was very, he talked down to a lot of these people. He thought that the scientists and research guys were, off the left end somewhere. So, and I do remember talking to him when I first met him, and it seemed, Lawrence, that we talked for like 12 hours straight, and I don't think the guy peed or did anything. I mean, he just talked, had about 47 cups of coffee and about 300 cigarettes. And, but he was really, he got excited about this stuff. He really loved it.
Interesting. So then obviously he assisted you, I suppose, in starting your Nautilus Fitness Center, and I guess you assisted in terms of helping conceptualize some of these protocols. How did things evolve from there? Because then I suppose it wasn't soon after that you started having a lot of business success.
Yeah, well, I opened this place in a factory building with 6 machines, and I said, and before that, there were no real fitness centers, honestly. There were, these iron dungeons and then the YMCA or something. So I opened a place where basically we were going to train people and they would pay money to come in and be trained in our system. So I remember I had a sign, and I was pretty hard-ass in the beginning because you had people come in that thought they knew what they were doing. They would way off. So I had a sign that said, "You will train properly here or not at all." So basically, this is my way or the highway. And I when I needed money when I started, but I kicked some people out and said, "I'm sorry, I can't let you do that in this place." And so we stuck to our guns, got real good results. And an author heard about the results through some people in New York who owned the franchise for New York with Arthur. And they even came over, even the guys who were running the franchise showroom for Nautilus came over to train with me. And they came from Manhattan. I was in Staten Island. And so Arthur got interested and said, "What are you doing?" And then Kenny Hutchins called me as a kid. I think Kenny was still in college. I'm not sure. I mean, if he was still there or done, whatever. Anyway, and he was asking me what I was observing. And I was telling him how slow we were going And he kept, picking my brain a little bit. And I mean, a curious kid, but he kept to the point where I said, listen, Kenny, talk to my buddy, Gary Furtak, one of my managers. I've got some stuff to do here. But in any case, Arthur was interested, and he knew the business was growing as a result. So but I think he was sincerely interested in how we were getting good results out of these machines, better than anybody had gotten before, and also how the businesses grew, and this could be a model for him. And he sent these people to me to show him my operation, so they would obviously want to buy Nautilus machines in open places, right? So I trained a good percentage of the people in the 70s and early 80s about how to use Nautilus machines. Basically, Arthur sent me a bunch of people.
But why is it interesting? So why do you think it was that you were getting better results if other, centers were using the same equipment? And I can't imagine the protocols were a mile away from each other in terms of the intensity. Right.
Yeah. Well, when the people first got Nautilus machines, they use Nautilus machines like they use pull-down machines, like they use barbells, like they use anything. They just used them without any particular cognizance or respect to technique. They just, 3 sets of 10, blah, 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 blah. Same old crap.
What was it, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. What?
Yeah. No, I'm curious, that makes sense. You mentioned Arthur also sent them to you to kind of understand your template for business as well. I'd love to know what you were doing differently at that time from a business point of view, how you were perhaps drumming up business better than some of those other fitness centers.
Understand, Lawrence, that there weren't other fitness centers. Okay, so as far as competition, I had none. But by the same token, as far as people joining a fitness center, there was no precedent. So what the hell you got up there? Got a bunch of machines, and upside, no competition. Downside, nobody knew what the hell I was doing. So but it worked out. There were enough people interested in exercise, and mostly former athletes at that point. Before it grew, and it grew tentacles and went into the health and the weight loss and all this other stuff. That's what happened. But because I presented it the way I did, I said, this is the way we do this. There was no wiggle room. We did some really good, high-intensity, controlled, successful, productive training. So people did get better results than they had traditionally. I mean, you would have gotten better results if you used those techniques with anything. But the fact that we had these machines helped me sell it, and it also helped me apply it. So it was a good kind of symbiotic relationship of philosophy and mechanism.
Yeah. No, I understand that now. Forgive me. I remember you saying about how you there was no competition in the beginning, for good or bad, when we last spoke. And I guess, okay, so just to clarify then, they were coming, Arthur was sending people he knew and staff to you to say, look what this guy's doing, and replicate it, basically. In terms of,
I think he said, listen, this is what your money spent on machines can get you, because I was pretty successful very quickly. I mean, I had 7 facilities in I think 3.5 years, all over the East Coast. So yeah, it grew exponentially.
Yeah, that is absolutely rapid growth. Okay, so I want to segue into some questions on actual high-intensity training, programming, and diet, actually. Been doing, as you know, been watching some of your presentations, reading through your book, which I've really enjoyed, and prompted a few questions for me. And we can bounce back to some of the business stuff later, because there's a few questions on that too. So, last time we were speaking, I was telling you about my own training journey. I was saying, I've been doing high-intensity training for probably at this point, 6 or 7 years now, and tried various different approaches. So, using machine-based sort of MedX approach, training anywhere from once to 3 times per week, and currently on like a sort of twice a week body weight regime. And I was saying to you how for me, and forgive me because I know you sort of did answer this, but I just wanted to go through it in a bit more detail with you. And you said, I said, for me, I can't cope with too much volume. If I do, more than 8 exercises in a workout, and it assumes I've done big movements that, are compound and use a lot of major muscle groups, I cannot bring the intensity towards the end of that. Therefore, it's not as effective for me. So I'm better off having, let's say 4 to 6 exercises in a routine and maybe working out more frequently. But you felt like there might be an underlying issue. So I'm curious, is that a genetic thing, or is there something off there for you when you see someone who can't cope with a higher volume or can't seem to train intensely on a higher volume?
First of all, I've got to see what you're talking about with your exercises. I mean, if you do compound movements, understand, and we've talked about this before, but there are global and local effects of exercises and responses, okay? So, yeah, I would have to try to ascertain whether you are globally taxing your system to the point where you can't globally respond. I would doubt that it's local if you're talking about, I mean, if you're working all the major muscle groups, or the majority of major muscle groups, I usually do exercise 7 to 10 is really what I'm usually doing with almost anybody. So, and I do primarily single joint rotational movements, because I think if we're looking at high intensity, I almost think we got to go back to the beginning here, Lawrence. You got a high intensity organization, or there are some, and yours is one. Now, what's the definition of high intensity, and what's the philosophy, and what's the physiology behind that? And these are things I think people might really be interested in, okay? So the basic philosophy that we have as high-intensity people is that we consider the volume of work to be a negative kind of an aspect because it interferes and is counterproductive to the intensity. In other words, the diametrically opposed directives, okay? The more we do, the less intensity we can apply. The less we do, the higher intensity we can apply. I mean, I think that's a general rule of thumb, and I think it's pretty reasonable. So, yes, and somebody who, like you said, like yourself, who's a hard gainer, you certainly have to understand that your adaptation capacity might be in the whole spectrum of adaptation levels on the lower side. So you have to be really very efficient in what you do. I got that. And it may have to do, when you say is it genetic, it may have to do with muscle fiber type. It may have to do with neurological efficiency. There's a number of physiological factors and metabolic factors that may be involved. There's no question. But in any case, when you say you can't, give these last few exercises, a full effort or something, or concentrated effort, I think that's okay if you go large muscles to small muscles.
Yeah.
Because globally, excuse me, but globally, you're probably working 70% of your muscle mass in the first 3 exercises or 4.
Exactly.
So you should be a little bit taxed, okay? And I still think relatively to the local effects. So now we've initiated this whole global response thing. And so basically the smaller muscles, I finish up with, shoulders, chest, and arms and whatever. And so I don't think you necessarily are going to feel, and some people have a kinesthetic limitation. They don't feel certain exercises, but you're going to feel as taxed. You certainly probably won't feel as taxed, even though at the end of this routine, you should feel specifically fatigued and taxed, but not as globally taxed. Does that make sense? In other words,
it does.
I'm not indicating or assessing, that you can't put your effort into those last exercises. How does that feel to you that you can assess that you're not putting full effort into it?
Yeah, the thing is, I've just kind of realized as we've been talking and listening to you is for instance, if you're doing a body weight protocol, and I know that from what I've heard, Ben, you're much more of an advocate of using better grade machines if they're available. But in using body weight, when you're doing a lot of the exercises, they are going to quite often use multiple muscle groups because it's very difficult to isolate, for want of a better word, muscle groups. So for that reason, it might be that because I'm doing a bodyweight routine and because even the later movements are still involving a large number of muscle groups in general, that it's a lot to ask for anyone, right?
Yeah, well, what it may be, I get emails, texts let's say a few a week from some of your major contributors that are experts, they are, relatively, about what's wrong with my routine. How can I do this? Believe me, I could show you this and do an expose. But anyway, Dr. Ben is there to answer. But what happens is when you're doing compound movements, especially for your upper body, then these muscle groups are now being taxed, in my opinion, maybe 2, 3, 4 times. In other words, if that's acceptable that you're doing these different exercises, and for example, your triceps or your delts are involved in 3 or 4 of these exercises, then in my opinion, you're doing 3 or 4 tricep or delt exercises. What's the difference between that and doing 4 sets for your bicep or 4 sets for your tricep? You know, why the same reason we do that would be the same reason I would try to suggest away from. And certainly there are bands now, those rubber friggin' cables. You can get monster cables, man. And I guarantee you can do some isolation movements and get some really damn good results and resistance, effective resistance out of those. So if it comes to the fact that your mechanical application is limiting your ability to isolate, and so you have to repetitively tax the same muscle groups, I think that's a limitation you want to overcome quickly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. And there's one thing I've been playing around with lately, which is which I'm really keen to get your opinion on, which is more time static contractions. It's amazing to me how much fatigue you can induce by simply putting the insides of your forearms around a door frame and doing like a time static contraction chest fly or like a pec deck,
right,
if that makes sense. You can decimate yourself with just a wall or the back of a chair even. And similarly, you can do a lateral raise in the same way if you stand in a door frame and push your forearms against the sides. And I've been playing around with these as a pre-exhaust. What's your thoughts on time static contraction training? Do you think it's just as effective for things like muscle hypertrophy as dynamic movement?
Well, here's the deal. I just listened to, you sent me a little link this morning, and I listened to the fellow. Do you know who I'm talking about? I can't remember.
Dr. Jeremy Lowenecki.
Yeah, maybe with him. He's a kid that he does research. Got trained in Mississippi or something?
That's right.
Or is that the guy?
Yeah. I sent you his episode on blood flow restriction.
Yeah. He was really modest, but on target in how he described. He basically said the blood flow restriction stuff, he doesn't think it's superior, but it's an alternative way, right? I mean, that's really what he says, which I thought was very spot on. He wasn't saying, this is my way and it's so much better.
I agree.
Okay. Understand that we are applying mechanical means to derive a metabolic response. Now, when we give these things different names, like static, whatever you call it, static, which is an isometric, okay?
Yeah.
What we're saying is this method as productive? And I can tell you, physiologically and clinically, observationally, that static contractions singularly are not as effective. Okay, and here's why. Okay, not that they can't be a part of a system, but we know that isometrics came into play in the 50s and 60s. Okay, big time. Static contraction, dynamic tension, Charles Atlas. I mean, this stuff's been around a long time. I think, and I don't think anybody will question what I'm saying, that there is a mechanical requirement and there is a metabolic requirement. Okay. Now, mechanically, I think isometrics are inhibited or limited because I think that they do not meet the minimal mechanical requirement. What we've done with high intensity training and with slow training is we've reduced the mechanical requirement to, I think, pretty much a bare minimum. So where you can get away with maybe, if you think 3 sets of 10, if we're doing 1 set of 3, we've reduced the mechanical mechanical work by 90%, somewhere around 90%. Okay, so think about that. But I think if you increase the mechanical work to 0%, that we haven't met the minimal mechanical requirement for muscle growth. Okay, and I think there is such a thing. Has it been designated by science? No. Can you measure it? Probably. So you can do different amounts of exercise and see but I still think the bottom line is, what is the metabolic response to that mechanical input, the routine? And I think that static contractions singularly and in and of themselves lack the minimal threshold mechanical requirement. Okay, does that make sense?
It does. That was really well put, actually. Totally.
No, I don't tell you that because nobody's thought about it like that. At least if they are, they're keeping it secret. But I think that's really something. There is I think that and there are proven. I mean, I'm going back now 40 years maybe. There were plenty of studies where the isometric routines didn't get the hypertrophy response and the strength response. And understand, because it's only in a portion of the range of motion. So if we're going to say full range of motion is a requirement, and I think that it probably is one of the elements, this is the be-all and the end-all, not necessarily, but I think that there is some mechanical range of motion kind of requirement that would be, if we're trying to get all, we're trying to take care of all the little nooks and crannies of possibility of, driving this optimal response, I think it's one thing to consider. There's a phenomenon called interdigitation, which means that your muscle fibers, motor units, have fibers that go all over the place. And I think understanding that, I think the full range of motion is probably a good idea. Let's put it, I don't think there's any downside, at least metabolically, if the mechanical response or mechanical effect is sufficiently high enough in all aspects of that range of motion. There's where we get into the difference between the strength curve and the resistance curve of the apparatus, including body weight or the wall. Those become subtle elements, which I have not heard anybody describe either. So there is a discrepancy and a bifurcation between the strength curve of a muscle group and the resistance curve of whatever the form of the resistance might be, whether it be a machine or a cable or, like I said, body weight. That's an element, I think, because we're talking about constancy of load. One of the things I think that this, and I don't know that much, I'm certainly not an expert on it, that the occlusion kind of stuff, that whatever you guys call that again. Anyway, the blood flow restriction thing is that I think that it does exacerbate or heighten the metabolic buildup of metabolites of fatigue, which I think is kind of cool. It may also inhibit some of the blood flow, which may be a positive, but I think in the long run, a lot of what we do, again, there are plenty of studies that show that the higher the intensity contraction, okay, the more blood flow restriction there is. That's been around. There's some real science that shows that stuff, okay? And I can kind of even cite you on that. I mean, I know this stuff pretty cold. The external mechanical pressure of contracting fibers will be greater during a contraction in arterial pressure at some point along the way. So the reduction in intensity reduces the occlusion. So therefore, you would think when occlusion is enhanced or exaggerated, like in blood flow restriction, then you're going to have the opposite effect. So you're going to be more anaerobic, which we think is a good thing. And if you're more anaerobic, you'll tax the anaerobic fibers. The most anaerobic fibers hypertrophy the most, blah, 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 blah. So down the line, you can see that there's some benefit to this thing. Now, what's interesting, when the fellow that I listened to today, the restricted blood flow guy, said you can do this with a lighter load. Well, I think you probably can. And I think that's probably, again, I do think that the metabolic chemical response to the exercise is primary. But again, I also think there's a mechanical element, and I don't think you get with a lighter load the mechanical intervention, because mechanically there is some disruption and there are some logical responses to purely the mechanical load of a heavy weight. Now, I do think that, again, the metabolic response really is probably 90% or 80%, and I'm just shooting numbers out my butt here, but a majority of the benefit comes from that. If we could, in other words, if we had a pill that could get you the metabolic effects of muscle building as we know it, that would probably work pretty well. And then the pill could be, testosterone and growth hormone combination bullet, some kind of thing. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
But so now let me go off on a little tangent. I know you mentioned Jason Fung, and if people aren't aware, Jason is really a leader in this whole diabetes, obesity kind of parade. Really knowledgeable guy, explains stuff beautifully. But he's talking about fasting and intermittent fasting enhancing HGH production, growth hormone. And it's true that in a fasting state, there's an elevation in HGH. I have to talk to Jason and tighten him up a little bit because that's true. But the fact that you increase HGH is not going to build muscle. In other words, if somebody's going to come to me and say, well, I'm intermittent fasting, that's going to grow muscle, I'm saying, yeah, well, let me know when it happens and come back and show me. Okay, that's it's a perspective from someone who doesn't know about muscle growth, and Jason shouldn't know about that. He's a nephrologist, but he's talking about this and saying, don't be afraid of wasting muscle. Which wasting muscle and growing muscle on a spectrum are either end of the spectrum. To me, they're not totally related, just vaguely in the case of this spectrum analysis. In any case, so I think I don't know where we were going with this. I got off on track a little bit, but I think
keep going.
Your question about well, here's the point. First of all, I think it's very difficult not to get fatigued and to work hard with body weight, but I think it's difficult to reach threshold level efficiently. Does that make sense? No, there's a difference. Those are two different things.
Oh, it does completely make sense.
This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, ARX. Are you looking to create a cutting-edge, high-intensity training facility? Are you confused on what equipment to use or how to separate yourself from the masses? Well, then ARX Fit might be the answer you're looking for. I asked Mike Polano from ARX a few questions about how ARX machines are challenging the status quo of the exercise industry around the globe. Mike, if you could, give the listeners a quick summary of why ARX is so different from the traditional machines or tools they're used to seeing in most exercise facilities.
ARX is totally different than anything you've seen before. This isn't just another weight stack machine. We've looked at the last 40 years of exercise technology and used that knowledge to create something entirely new. ARX uses a new form of resistance, a motor, and we pair that motor with computer software so that we can maximize the safety, effectiveness, and efficiency of your workouts. So you may be asking, okay, but how does ARX compare to weights? Traditional machines you see in gyms today are based on lifting metal weights and battling gravity. What people don't realize is that when you're forced to lift a static weight like this, one that doesn't adapt or change while you use it, you're underloading yourself rep after rep. And this unnecessarily limits your ability to make improvements. With ARX, we've taken a totally different approach. We removed weights and gravity from the equation altogether. Instead, ARX combines our patented motorized resistance with our custom computer software to provide you with the world's safest, most effective, and most quantified form of resistance training ever. When you train with ARX, you are training to your perfect level of resistance, both positively and negatively 100% of the time. No more guessing what weight to use. ARX does all of that for you, instantly and automatically. We'll also track and measure every second of every rep, so you can quantify all of your workouts to find out if you're improving and by exactly how much. Whether your goals are bigger muscles, increased strength, stronger bones, or just to look good in a bathing suit, ARX can help you achieve all of these and more, but do so in a fraction of the time it would take compared to traditional equipment. If you're looking for the most efficient, most effective, and most quantified piece of exercise equipment on the market today, then look no further than ARX.
Thanks, Mike. That all sounds really impressive. If you'd like to learn more about ARX, visit arxfit.com and mention that you heard about ARX on the Corporate Warrior podcast to receive an exclusive deal of $500 off shipping and installation off your ARX machines.
Are you saying that you can get to the same endpoint, it just takes longer with body weight? It's just more efficient with machines. Is that basically what you're saying? In that what you just said?
Longer, and I understand, Lawrence, if it takes longer, what have we done to the intensity of that routine, of that exercise? If it takes longer, past a certain minimal point, we have diminished the intensity, haven't we? We have necessarily, because those two things are diametrically opposed. If it takes longer, then we have fatigued the muscles at a lesser than optimally intense state. Now, I'm not going to claim here in the long run in your lifetime, is it a 3%, 10%, 20% difference? But if we have this philosophy of high intensity, that's what I'm saying. We want to define this a little bit. Then I think, according to our philosophy at least, that philosophically we haven't worked as high. Again, if I ask you to sprint, you ain't going a mile. Okay, so understand that I think we're trying to stack the deck in our favor. What we espouse in high intensity training, I think philosophically, and hopefully, input that into our mechanical routine, is efficiency. Okay, that it's not volume, it's intensity, it's recruitment, it's metabolic buildup that we're trying to accomplish, not accomplish a certain amount of mechanical load total. Okay, so if that's okay, if that's the case, And if it takes 3 minutes to get you there, I would offer that we probably can raise the intensity, because I don't think you can really work at the taxation of the muscle fibers we're looking for that hypertrophy the most and get the strongest with a 3-minute load. I think we have to do it in a lesser load time.
Yeah. Sorry, Ben, if I may interject just for a second, I was about to object to you quite harshly, but actually what you're saying makes quite a lot of sense. But I think, for instance, with a bodyweight routine, we're talking excellent form, really, really smooth turnarounds, a type of, form you would expect with someone who's been doing high intensity training for a while. Most people, if they're doing push-ups, for instance, would reach muscular fatigue or at least mechanical fatigue, more likely the latter, probably within 90 seconds, most people, even really strong people. So I still think you're going to get the efficiency.
Listen, Lawrence, I'm not saying no to what you're saying. I'm saying, are we defining this? Are we delineating levels of intensity? That's all I'm saying. Now, I think that a 250-pound guy doing chin-ups to failure really slowly, as opposed to maybe a 120-pound guy, is going to have a different load time. Why? Because the load is more appropriate. Okay, so if you were doing a chin-up to failure and I strapped 50 pounds on you, I think it would be more efficient, or whatever the weight might be, more efficient, more productive than if you just did body weight, depending on your strength and the relative proportion or ratio of your strength to that resistance applied. Okay? Mm-hmm. That's all I'm saying. And then I also think that we have this, there should be, I think, a constancy of load. In other words, when the downside of multi-joint, complex movements, in my opinion, are that never in a complex movement is the primary mover optimally working, because at some point these other supplementary muscle groups are helping and taking over. Mm-hmm. Okay, and therefore there's a little bit of a relative rest and a lack of intensity. Now, is that being picayune? Probably. But does it mean something? I think it does. I think it does. In other words, if I'm doing a pull down and I'm trying to work my biceps, a close grip, supinated pull down. Okay. Now, my lats are going to be working a lot. Okay, and my traps are going to be working, and even my tricep a little bit for extension, and my bicep. So when, for example, this resistance applies more effective tension or load on a muscle other than the bicep, okay, then the bicep is relatively resting. So we're unloading it. So my point is, with multiple joint exercises, there is an unloading and an optimal loading in the same sequence of one repetition. But is it constant enough that we're not having this recovery? And again, nobody knows this, and it's just a thought. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying, why go there if you don't have to? That's my point. But that you can't get good work and optimal loads and things, or very good loads out of the other stuff? No, I'm not saying that. That's silly. That doesn't make any sense. But if we're going to try to develop this perfect workout, or this perfect rep even, or perfect set, or as perfect as we can mechanically acquire, then I think it's a consideration. Let's put it that way, okay?
Yeah. No, I love getting into the details of this stuff. So with like a lat pull down, for instance, like you were saying there, what is the prime mover, the lats or the biceps? It's the lats, isn't it? What would be the prime mover in that?
Let me answer this by dancing around the question. If the biceps are the primary mover, then the lats are certainly not going to be taxed to their full extent. Okay, and it's impossible, because the difference in leverage and strength potential are way off. Okay, so you have, if you think about a lat pull down, you've got traps, you've got lats, you've got posterior delt, you've got some tricep, you've got bicep, obviously, you've got forearm. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. Okay, so and again, depending on how you do it, you can kind of predispose one muscle group to another. Here's a perfect example. Okay, you go on a rowing machine. I'm talking about an exercise rowing machine, weighted, rows. And it tells you to keep your chest up against the chest pad, right? Always. You always see that. Now, to me, that's stupid. Because if you're trying to work lats and traps, don't forget, traps go low, and a lot of people feel traps and they think it's lats. But in any case, if you're trying to load those big muscles and you keep your chest up to that chest pad, once you get within, again, 6 inches of your hands reaching your shoulders, okay, when you're coming back, retracting, then those big muscles have no leverage, and your smaller muscles of your rhomboids and maybe your upper trap and things like that, posterior delt a little bit, have to come into play. Now, if the weight's strong enough for you to get a full repetition with your chest on that board, and your elbows are way past, have come past your body, backward, okay, then the weight's too light for your lats, because that curve should drop off precipitously. So what I tell people to do is lean back so I get an angle into the lats and the traps, the big muscles, and that this weight, I shouldn't be able to attain full movement at the end with my chest in that position, because now I'm relying, if I had to rely on the weight that I can do that with, it's way too light for the big muscles I'm trying to load. That's where I'm talking about trying to match up the mechanical machine, the application of the resistance source and the strength curve, okay, that kind of a thing. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
no, this is interesting. I would never think it's certainly not popular in the high intensity circle to lean back away from the pad on a row. I think most people are told to do the opposite. So you feel like, you should pivot, like as you're coming back, you then begin to lean back at the end of the movement to then really engage. Yeah.
I think if that weight's, these are powerful muscles. There are machines. I'm 70 years old. Okay. There are machines that I go on to do my rows. I have to use the whole stack, and no question, or else I'm just jerking around. Okay. But I do lean back. Because if I use a weight that I can use and get with my chest up and just do a pure retraction, which is really a scapular move, and it's an real upper back, lower neck movement, okay, posterior delt movement, I can't come close to loading my lats with the weight that I need to use to work my lats and my traps. Again, traps probably a little more than you think, and lats maybe a little less, but still, absolutely, okay? So, yes, I think and I don't think most people go on there to work their rhombo weights, okay? That's my point. So yes, and again, you have to analyze the applied anatomy and then see what am I doing here, and again, and I obviously thought about this more than most people because I got nothing better to do. But I mean, these things would, I think, in fact, make sense to most people, and it doesn't behoove me to have an opinion one way or the other, except to try to get this maximum kind of response and effectiveness for whoever's doing this exercise. Yeah. So I think again now. Understand, now, are my arms involved in this movement, the row, for example? Yes, they are. Are they the limiting factor? Probably a little bit, yes, they are. But, okay, for me to think that that's an arm exercise and then just use a weight that would be not just tax my arms and then my lats would certainly never be taxed to their reasonably full potential. So that's what I'm talking about with a little bit with compound movements. And I think they can be very effective, and I think technique has a lot to do with what benefit that you get out of this stuff. But know what you're actually doing when you're doing it, and it's like ab work, Lawrence. I mean, I teach simple. If you look in my book, I show a simple ab work, and you could develop Mr. Olympia abs doing what I have in my book, okay? And it'd probably take you about 1% or 5% of the time that most people work on their abs. They're real simple muscles, okay? But most people, in my opinion and observation, when they're working their abs, are not working abs. They're working hip flexors. Mm-hmm. Okay? And in that case, you can go on and on and on, and you can also stress, the lower lumbar that the psoas and the iliopsoas are attached to. Okay? And that's why you hurt your back doing abs, because it's ridiculous to hurt your back doing abs, because they're the antagonistic muscles to your erectors, which would twist extend your spine. And so, to me, that's a perfect example. You think you're working your abs, you go on and on. If you isolate your abs, they're going to get tired very quickly, okay, with just some simple exercises. So know what you're doing, to my point. Know what you're really doing, which muscles are doing the work.
Just on the subject of abs, I'm a fan of doing leg raises, which you actually go through in the book. But forgive me, I can't recall what you say if you talked about this, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask you now. One of the issues I have, I'm not sure if this is actually a problem, is when I do leg raises, I normally lie on like a yoga mat. There is normally a gap between the floor and my lower back. Is that a bad thing? Is that avoidable? Like, what's your view on that?
It's critical. Okay, that's critical. That space is called a lordosis. Your spine curves up. Everybody has that unless you've got a deformity, in which case you've got a deformity. Okay, so lie on your back. I always try to support the neck, but if you're doing leg raises, you're strong enough, you shouldn't have to. Anyway, unless that lordosis is neutralized. Okay, understand that your abs are located in front of your spine. When they contract, they compress. Okay, when they compress, they round your spine. When they round your spine, they are activated. When they round your spine, that lordosis should come out. It should be, your lower back should be on the floor. In fact, the first exercise I give to low back patients is to do what they call a pelvic tilt, so they can actually feel the spine rounding into the floor, belly button going down, chest going, okay, and then do a crunch. If your spine is rounded, you can work your abs. If your spine is not rounded, you cannot work your abs because they round your spine. Okay? So if you round your spine on your leg raises by doing like a semi-crunch, but pressing that lower back into the floor, now raise your legs slowly, you're going to feel isolation in your abs, not only in your abs, but in your lower abs, which everybody wants to do because they think that's where the lower, the body fat really resides, but they think it's important, but it is. So the stabilization of that spine and the rounding and the taking out of that lordosis is what activates your abs. If that lordosis exists, you are not working abs. If you have if your back is on the floor, then you're engaging abs. When that back comes off the floor, stop, because now you're working hip flexors, your abs are done. But if you can accomplish that, and I have a whole section of that in the book, and not plugging the book, but that's a question people ask me all the time. That's how you work your abs. Okay, it's that simple. That's what they do. And if you isolate it purely, feel fatigue real quick.
Yeah, just to clarify then, when you're absolutely right. Like obviously when my feet, when my body is L-shaped at the top of that contraction, my lower back is against the floor. But when my feet are right by the floor, that curve reveals itself. So that's normal though, right? That's okay? Is that what you're saying?
No. Very important, very important.
Right.
It's telling you that your abs are disengaging because the resistance of the torque of your leg weight is too much for your abs to isolate.
I see.
But if you lose that, don't go all the way down, and you'll learn.
It.
I mean, again, I can come down to a quarter inch from the floor, never touch, without that lordosis occurring again. And if it starts to bend, if you start to leave the floor with your lower back, that's your limited range of motion at this point. Okay, that's your limitation. Don't go lower, because then you're gonna.
Is that too much chair sitting? Do you think?
Oh no! It's
genetic.
Well, chair sitting. Don't even get me involved with that, because I've done studies on chair sitting and sedentary behavior. But no, you have a spine that's in that position. That's the Homo erectus. You have that. It's part of the support mechanism. Okay, the shape of that spine. But if you're working abs purely, they round your spine. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. If you do like a wall seat, or just put your back against the wall and just try to press your lower back, take that lordosis, that space out, you'll feel your abs start to engage. That's the first move that I demand everyone does when they're doing ab work. And very important. That's why I put a section of it in the book, because people ask me that constantly. Mm-hmm. I have people come to me and say, I do 100 leg raises for my ab routine. I say, okay, try this. Lower back on the floor, raise your head up into a crunch so you're rounding your spine. Okay, so now I'm isolating. And they do 6 or 7. They go, oh, my God. I said, okay, we got 93 to go, okay? The point is you can't do it. Okay, you're not going to do it. Unless you have, legs of a bird, okay, you're going to get some good work out of just that position. And if by some chance you get a hugely strong person, I can make sure that there's enough resistance. If I put a little resistance on their ankles, trust me, they ain't doing a lot of these. So that's my point. It's a significant point, because you can teach people how to do this stuff, and if you're not teaching them properly, you're teaching them how to hurt themselves. Okay, then to me, that's just totally irresponsible.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to revisiting those pages, actually, because that sounds like some good advice, and I want to learn more about that. I want to go back a second, Ben, because there's a few things I just want to clarify. I was talking to you about the prime mover and the lat pull down. Let's just agree on like a chest press. The chest is the prime mover, right? Ideally.
No. I want to. On a chest press, primary move is your tricep. Secondary move is your anterior delt.
Okay.
Tertiary, third move is your pecs.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify, like, what a prime mover in an example exercise. So let's say, which just highlights my poor knowledge in this area. So let's say you're doing a chest press and you do your triceps and a prime mover and a chest press, right? But going back to your previous point, you were explaining how the potential downside of compound exercise is that you might not actually be fatiguing that prime mover as much as you'd like. Let's say if you're trying to stimulate for maximum hypertrophy. So with that in mind, would you look at following that up with like a post-exhaust or something, like a more direct exercise for the triceps, for instance? So like tricep press downs or something like that. How might you program for that? Yeah.
This now becomes a matter of subjectivity. Okay. And I'm not saying you can't develop pecs by doing a chest press. What I'm saying is understand. It's a perfect example of understanding how you're unloading. If you take the last 10 degrees, 4 inches, I'm just shooting out some numbers here, of a chest press when you get to where you're going to lock out the elbow to extension, okay? Your pecs are unloaded. Your triceps do that, okay? Okay, there's no question about it. Unloaded, relatively unloaded. So that's my point about at what point does that the objectively primary mover become unloaded, and now we have to recover again. It's like resting between sets a little bit in a mini example, right? Mm-hmm. Well, why wouldn't we just rest between sets when we get to fatigue? Well, why would we unload? So the way you do a chest press for your chest is I don't do the last 10 degrees of that movement, okay? I try to keep my elbows wide, and I try to do things that will make the pec work more than the tricep. I can do a close grip on some machines, what you call a chest press, and it's a great tricep mover if I just, keep my elbows to my sides and make sure I exaggerate the weight at the end of the movement where I get to be more of a purely tricep exercise. In the beginning, do the chest and shoulders work? Yes. So are my triceps unloaded? Yes. That's my point about unloading, relative unloading in a compound movement. Is it the end of the world? I don't think so. Obviously, it's not, because people get good results from doing it.
Sure.
I'm just saying philosophically, theoretically, if we are high-intensity people, is that diminishing the intensity of that load momentarily enough to reduce the intensity? And I'd say, my opinion, probably not so much, but if I can do it a better, more efficient way with constant load, that would be my preference.
Cool. And yeah, I know we're really splitting hairs now, but I'm going to ask you about these things anyway. And just one other clarification I wanted to make is, you made a good argument as to why isometrics may be suboptimal as a means for producing hypertrophy in isolation. However, and you mentioned that obviously context is really important. So in the context of doing, say, an isometric and let's say some sort of body weight times static contraction, but you're then chasing that up with a second exercise that targets the same muscle groups, that's dynamic. Do you think then you're probably going to get bang for your buck?
I think here's how I would use an isometric. And I think it's effective, and it may just be psychologically or behavioral effective. I don't know, and if there's a guy who knows that, please call me. At the end of your set, say a lateral raise, which has a lot of fast twitch, which has a quick point of fatigue. Lateral raise, you do 2 or 3, it feels good. All of a sudden, they go. I think it's because of the fast twitch, fast fatiguing fibers. Okay, but in any case, so I'm done with my lateral raise, okay, or I can't get a full rep. Now, can I maybe hold an isometric position and keep trying to pull? In other words, producing tension while not producing movement. That to me is what isometric really is. I think it's okay. I do it myself. Now, I do it because I have one shoulder that's not working very well, okay? And I can't get a lot of mechanical work at it. In certain positions I can't attain. But I can hold an isometric contraction. I think it's way beneficial. And at the end of the movement, I'll do an isometric on some of on a leg extension even. I'll halfway down or something like that, So do I think, and I think, and again, it's a guess, and it's no more of my guess than anybody else's guess. But I think if we really want to take this thing to failure, if we want to take this failure thing, to the nth degree, in a reasonable amount of time, and not just fail from mechanical work, but metabolic fatigue, then I think it's okay. I think what the hell harm is it going to do? Mm-hmm. As long as it's doing, a 2-minute isometric, in which case it's just, to me, that's just silly. Okay, but yeah, I think you use isometrics. And I think in certain movements, isometrics are really probably better than other movements. Okay, a wall seat. Or imagine a wall seat for your quads and your glutes and hand, whatever you're doing it for. Imagine a wall seat with 250 pounds on your back on a barbell, okay? Now, I think if you did an isometric at 90 degrees, that'd be a pretty damn good exercise, okay? Is it totally complete? Maybe not, but I think just with that. But again, a wall seat for most people, and they can do it. I have an 87-year-old guy who came into me frail. He can do a wall seat for 2 minutes now, okay? So my observation is, and again, it's just an observation, my impression, my opinion, it's probably not sufficient for most people to do a wall seat. Although the next day they'll be sore. It's a different kind of an application of resistance and posturally and all that stuff, which has some benefit. But I think there's a better way to work his quads and his hamstrings and his glutes. But that may be the best way I can do it for him. And if that's the best thing you have available, what I'm saying is, I think for a guy like you, I'm envisioning, your level. If you did a wall seat with resistance, like maybe 20, 50 pounds up, I don't know your strength level, in your hands, I think that'd be a hell of an exercise at 90 degrees, okay? Am I leaving something on the table? Probably. Does it make the difference in the ultimate result? I'm not sure.
Interesting. That's a really good point, and appreciate you just giving your view on that. One of the other things I want to talk about is time under load. I think a lot of people, including myself, in high intensity training, are kind of taught to look at trying to reach muscular failure in a kind of 45 to 90 second window. I think in your book, you mentioned at some point, 30 seconds being a requisite minimum time under load. Is that because 30 seconds is, from what you've seen, the minimum in terms of fatiguing the full spectrum muscle fibers and for making the exercise effective?
Well, fatigue is fatigue. Okay, let's however it's interpreted. So I'm trying to correlate externally the mechanical fatigue failure with the metabolic threshold. Okay, understand that. That's what I'm trying to do. And again, this is stuff that's opinionated, and I think observed. And I try to be an objective observer of this stuff. So again, here's the difference now in load. If I'm doing an isolated single joint movement, I think my load time is going to be less than if I do a multi-joint movement. Okay, for the reasons I talked about a lot, because I think you're periodically in one repetition unloading a little bit. So I think you therefore, unloading means reducing the load. Therefore, I may be able to go a little bit longer until the point I reach fatigue, hopefully corresponding to metabolic threshold. Okay, so the 30 seconds I'm talking about. Because I've seen, with most people, we're talking, at least 2 or maybe 3 to 4 reps in my, again, and I'm a slow training guy, okay? So that's what I see as happening to most people. So, and I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's what I see. So sometimes it could be 30. Now, if I'm doing a rowing motion, let's go back to that. I don't think I'm going to fail in 30 seconds because I have so many muscles involved and this not so much, but there is this resting, relatively unloading, or certainly diminution of the loading in certain parts of that movement. So I think you're going to therefore be able, it's like, sprinting really fast, but, maybe jogging for like 3 or 4 seconds and then sprinting, that's the kind of thing I envision in my model.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I guess one thing I don't fully understand is how you came up with that as being like the minimum amount of time. Oh,
well, a couple of ways. Observation, but you look in any of your exercise phys books, and you'll see that there are certainly demarcations of which people have studied when, what they call maximum load. Now, am I, religiously attached to some of those definitions and observations? Not really, but I think you can pretty much understand that muscles can only work at a really high intensity. Muscle maximum fuel octane level, let's put it that way, for a very short period of time. And I think 30 seconds, 45 seconds, when you get in there, or certainly up to 90 seconds, if you start getting higher than that, I think you're going to start to down recruit, meaning I think type 2B, or they call type 2X now, they have a different demarcation than I use, but we'll kick out. Okay, so that's what I think. That's why I think that time under load correlates. And I think some people are different. Yes, I do, but I don't think they're hugely different. In other words, I don't think it's either 20 seconds or 2.5 minutes. I think the range is more, restricted or similar in almost every case.
Sure. I want to pivot into diet because I'm just being conscious of time, Ben, and I want to make sure we cover some of my dietary related questions off with you. I had Dr. Ted Naiman on the podcast a while back, and we were talking about who I know you're probably quite familiar with. We were talking about this whole carbs being protein sparing thing. Now, we talked about this, and Ted's view was that, protein is protein sparing. And, apparently some of the research by Finney and Volek, I believe, showed that, glycogen stores fill up. Is it something like just as fast from protein ingestion as they do from carbohydrate ingestion? And so perhaps this view that we require carbs to maximize muscle hypertrophy is actually kind of unfounded. So as long as you get insufficient protein, it's not really required. I know you're a low carb, high fat kind of advocate, or at least a low carb advocate, I should say. So I'm curious, do you feel like carbohydrates are important for this protein sparing effect or other, or do you feel like that's kind of overhyped nonsense?
Okay, are carbs required for a protein sparing effect? No, I would answer no to that. And understand this: glycogen, sugar, carbs, in their digested, usable state, are required for high intensity contractions. And they're also they fuel the life and death fight or flight fibers, right? Absolutely. Now, the point is, you don't have to ingest carbs to make carbs, to make glycogen. You can, and because I think they are so primarily developmentally, ingrained in our DNA, these fight or flight fibers, your body will find a way to make glycogen, gluconeogenesis. It's going to make glycogen whether you ingest it or not, and make sure you're filled up, your muscle fibers are filled up with that. So I don't think you're going to have a deficit because of a lack of carbohydrate and the ability of those muscles to work hard and produce creatine, in the phosphocreatine ready available state. I think, those things, those fight or flight fuel mechanisms are not going to be inhibited by a low carb input, because you can make all the carb you need, even for your brain, and certainly for your muscles. There have been enough studies, and I've observed this for years, that you're gonna make glycogen without eating sugar, without eating carbs, and that's why that exists. Understanding that as a developmental process in the species. There was a lot of times when you didn't have any glycogen, and if your muscles couldn't do their hard work, they're hunting, killing, dragging, whatever. We wouldn't be successful as a species. So you can make all the glycogen you need to build all the muscle you need. I don't know if that's answering your question, but that's and there's plenty of evidence to that. There's no question. There is no glycogen depletion, especially in keto adapted athletes, meaning that you're really relying on fat. Because now, don't forget, you're using fat so primarily that it's glycogen sparing. And so if it's enough so that you can, and the muscles will respond obviously just as well to glycogen that you've made through gluconeogenesis as it will to glycogen ingested, if not better and more purely.
Yeah, no, that absolutely does answer the question. There's one final question I'll ask you before we wrap up. This is a bit of a complex one and probably not going to be easy to answer. I don't think I've perhaps given you many easy questions during this chat, Ben. And that's, myself and a number of my, colleagues in this area like to train fasted. If I'm training late morning, I might do intermittent fasting and not train with any food in my stomach. Similarly, I don't always, and this might be suboptimal and you might think that, but I don't always like to ingest food straight after. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is I don't always feel incredibly hungry straight after. And I mean like an hour or two after. But also, there's obviously a number of processes that go on after you've pushed the boulder off the edge of the cliff, as you put it in your analogy, which stimulate adrenaline to liberate fatty acids, and cleave glycogen out of the muscle, and then all the myokines are getting secreted, and all of these processes are going on. And sometimes I feel like if you are eating immediately after a big workout, that you may be interrupting some of those processes and maybe not getting maximal benefit from an overall health point of view. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think there's any validity to what I just said?
There's plenty of evidence to indicate that if you eat carbohydrate an hour or even maybe 90 minutes or whatever after that, you'll diminish growth hormone response. There's plenty of evidence. There's some studies on that, not a question. As far as eating fasted, I think it's probably not a bad thing. Okay, whether it's more effective, as long as, don't forget, we're doing high intensity exercise. What do we need? We need glycogen. Okay, we need creatine. We need those things that fuel this high intensity, short exposure to high intensity loads. What you eat an hour before that, in my opinion, has nothing to do with your fuel availability for that kind of work. So, and I think if we're in a fasted state, okay, we haven't eaten, then we're now in a fat burning state. And it may be, and I don't know this, and I'm sure as hell that nobody knows it that's talking about it. We're not sure if you'll burn fat at a higher rate. But again, we would, and the reason I think that you're not hungry after this, Lawrence, is because don't forget this adrenaline response. In my book, remember I tell you that we release fatty acids because once you start to deplete glycogen, whether you deplete it all, which you don't, and whether you start to deplete it at a huge rate, I think the emergency response to this is, oh my God, we're depleting this jet fuel like crazy. I better make sure I got some backup fuel. And what does your body do? It drives free fatty acid, triglyceride into free fatty acids to have backup fuel. So now we have overshot our fuel circulating, just as opposite of what aerobic exercise does. Okay, where it borrows, and now you have to pay back this deficit kind of thing. Now we've got this excess, and you don't, and also the adrenaline response a little bit. You have energy, so you're not hungry because you now have recruited these free fatty acids into action. So now circulating, we probably have a little bit of an excess of free fatty acids or energy. So why would you be hungry? Okay, I think most of the hunger that I feel, including my good buddy Gary Taub says he's hungry, is psychological and behavioral. Certainly not physiological. Certainly not in the normal set of metabolic pathways.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I just wondered, I've started, I had a protein shake the other day before my workout, about half hour before, which I never really do, but a friend of mine suggested experimenting with it. And I just felt really nauseous after my workout because I felt like I had this food swimming around in my stomach, or these amino acids, or whatever. And it was like, well, is that really worthwhile feeling like that after training? I don't know,
Well, again, anytime you engage in a behavior, what's the objective? If you can't, if it says, oh, it makes me feel better, well, that's good. There's a lot of things that make you feel better. Is there any kind of metabolic, reinforcement that this is a reasonable thing to do? And if there isn't, what are you doing it for? Okay, so maybe I never liked before a game or a competition or even an exercise routine to have stuff in my stomach. That was just my preference before I even knew anything about this stuff. I'm talking about when I played ball in high school, semi-pro levels, all this, any level. I never wanted food in my stomach. I just didn't feel right with it. And I think the hunger part afterward, to me, was almost a behavioral, once I settled down and showered and got to a place where I could relax, I wanted to eat, but I'm not so sure I needed fuel. I just think that was part of my ritual. So that I can't designate what's what, but I can tell you, you don't want carbs after high intensity workout. It does diminish HGH production. And so I think that would be a reason not to eat right afterwards. And I don't think it's going to replenish anything that you've lost so, exponentially.
That's
better.
That's an interesting point of view because I know someone who I won't name who's a very well-known person who does advocate high carb on a workout day. And you're saying that it inhibits or diminishes HGH, which would then inhibit muscle growth or gains from that training.
Yeah, you would assume that. Now, there's a whole thing we can go into HGH and the promoting fasting is producing HGH really quickly. And I'm going to tell this to Jason Fung, who I respect totally. that his interpretation of growing muscle somehow, or the connotation that maybe you're going to grow muscle by fasting, I don't buy. Now, it does produce more HGH, but I think it produces it almost like it produces cortisol, because your body's saying, hey, you don't have any fuel. I better make sure that you've got some available strength potential. But the fact of the matter is, HGH, when not co-joined by some kind of muscle stimulation, will not produce muscle growth. In fact, when it metabolizes into IGF-1, okay, it actually, the metabolic effect of fasting will diminish that IGF-1, which is the productive part of the HGH process, by 50%. So no, I don't think you'll grow muscle, but I don't think that the fasting produces HGH to that extent. Here's a simple thing on HGH, and I know a lot of people ask about it. 25-year-old, 27-year-old medical law student, you know the levels of HGH you're producing at that age? Big, okay? Right. Big. Are they all muscular? Are they all strong? Do they all hypertrophy on a constant basis? They're as slobby as any other sucker in the world, okay? Unless you do something to manifest response to that metabolic hormonal milieu, to that soup that's really kind of fertile, you're not going to produce muscle growth. Why would you? So just by the fact that you think you can increase HGH by fasting, and you think that you don't have to apply some exercise, and exercise that produces hypertrophy, is just ignorant.
Yeah, and I think that's a great spot to wrap this one up, Ben. I appreciate you taking the time to. I really enjoyed just chatting with you about all this stuff. What's the best way for the listeners to find out more about you, and how can they get hold of your book?
Go to the post office, see the wanted list, and see if my name is up there. No, I'm just kidding. drbenbow.com, and then is my web thing, whatever the hell you call it. And then my book is 15 Minutes to Fitness, and I think it answers a lot of the questions we're talking about, and it answers a lot of the questions that high-intensity people, I think, should know, and gives them a little bit of a basis in science and a lot of a basis in practical application.
Yeah, no, I definitely recommend it. There's also some great recipes in there too, and meal plans for sort of a low carb approach. And for everyone listening, so check out drbenbow.com, isn't it? benbo.com?
drbenbo.com. And also have them look at that Ivor interview. You just Google Ivor Cummins /Dr. Ben, and it'll come up. I think that gives you a nice, again, we didn't get into the business part but I think health is where we want to go with this high intensity. That's your business model. We'll do a second talk here, but sure. That's how you monetize this and become an accepted professional that can make a living doing this, and have a good lifestyle and a rewarding career.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll definitely cover that off in a sequel to this, Ben. And for everyone listening, if you're interested in another podcast that Ben and I created together, which was all about Ben's business and how he grew that and the principles that he follows to grow his high intensity training business, and that is available within the membership, where you can also learn how to grow your business with lots of the resources present there. So I will put a link to that as well in the show notes. And to find the show notes for this episode, please go to corporatewarrior.co/Dr. Ben. That's DR and then Ben. So /Dr. Ben. And for all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook to get a bunch of goodies, including number 1, a free ebook of podcast transcripts with some of my top guests like Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Simone on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. Number 2, a free high-intensity training business checklist to help you get more clients in your business. And number 3, a free high-intensity training Google Sheet to help you track and improve your training progress. Head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook now and enter your email address for instant access. This episode is brought to you by ARX, the most innovative, efficient, and effective all-in-one exercise machines I have ever seen. I was really impressed with my ARX workout. The intensity and adaptive resistance was unlike anything I've ever experienced.
I love how the machine enables you to increase the negative load to fatigue target muscles more quickly, and I love how the workouts are effortlessly quantified. The software tracks maximum force output, rate of work, total amount of work done, and more in front of you on screen, allowing you to compete with your previous performance to give you and your clients real-time motivation. The ARX uses a computer-controlled motor to give you the exact amount of resistance your clients need 100% of the time. This means that the resistance can never become dangerous, is intuitive and simple to use, and can provide you with all of the results you and your clients are looking for in a fraction of the time. ARX is highly effective and efficient in delivering all of the benefits of exercise, including increased strength, muscle mass, cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density, and injury recovery. As well as being utilized by many high-intensity trainers to deliver highly effective and efficient workouts to their clients, ARX comes highly recommended by world-class trainers and brands, including Bulletproof, Tony Robbins, and Ben Greenfield Fitness. To find out more about ARX and get $500 off install when you place an order, please go to arxfit.com and mention Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field. So again, to get $500 off install when you order, head on over to arxfit.com and enter Corporate Warrior in the How Did You Hear About Us field.